Russia is in chaos. Trains are derailing, recruitment centers are burning, and fuel depots hundreds of miles from the front lines keep mysteriously exploding. This isn't the war Putin promised. It's not even the one he understands anymore. Because what's tearing Russia apart right now isn't NATO, it's Russians. Ordinary citizens, underground fighters, cyber saboteurs. Some working for Ukraine, others acting alone. All united by one quiet goal: bleed the regime from the inside. And it's working. The Kremlin can't stop it, the military can't track it, and Putin, the man who promised to restore order, is watching his empire rot from within. This isn't a future scenario. The secret war has already started, and it may be the one that finally brings Russia down. For decades, Vladimir Putin's Russia projected an image of unassailable stability. State media trumpeted national unity. Dissent was smothered before it could spread. When Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, any cracks in the facade were swiftly papered over with fear. Anti-war demonstrations were crushed within hours. Criticism of the special military operation was criminalized overnight. Speaking out could mean prison or worse. On the surface, the regime's iron grip seemed firm, a monolith of power tolerating no disloyalty. But beneath that surface, discontent was simmering. Moscow's confidence rested on familiar tools: fear and repression to contain any internal dissent. Millions were expected to nod along with state propaganda, even as anxiety and grief crept into Russian homes. Casualties at the front mounted, sanctions squeezed the economy, thousands of families began whispering questions the Kremlin dared not acknowledge. Putin's rule was built on a brittle bargain: silence and obedience in exchange for stability. As long as Russians remained passive, the cracks in his system stayed hidden beneath the glossy veneer of unity. But history has a way of undermining regimes that refuse to see their own decay. In early 2022, the Kremlin could still pretend that all was well, that Russians were rallying around the flag. It was an illusion. Unseen by nightly news cameras, small acts of defiance were beginning to multiply. Putin's war, meant to solidify his legacy, was instead lighting the fuse of an internal implosion, and nobody in the Kremlin saw it coming. It began at the fringes of Putin's expanding empire. As Russian troops stormed into Ukraine's oblasts in 2022, they expected to be welcomed as liberators, a grave miscalculation. The illusion that Ukrainians would greet Putin's army with flowers and tears of joy vanished almost immediately. Instead, an angry resistance flared in the occupied territories, defying Moscow's narrative at every turn. When open protest was met with abductions, torture, and execution of local Ukrainian leaders, resistance didn't die. It simply went underground. In towns like Melitopol and Mariupol, clandestine groups carried out daring acts of sabotage. In one dramatic incident, partisans slipped explosives into a vehicle carrying a Russian drone crew. The blast failed to kill its targets, but it sent a clear message. Soon after, in Luhansk, bombs planted beneath Russian military vehicles did hit that mark. The explosion killed 4 Russian soldiers who they thought were safe behind front lines. They weren't isolated pranks. They were the opening shots of an organized underground war. By night, Ukrainian partisans and local collaborators moved in secret, cutting supply lines, eliminating collaborators, and spying on Russian troops. In Crimea, infiltrators filmed fighter jets taking off from Sakai Air Base, feeding real-time intelligence to Ukraine's military planners. A vast occupied land that Moscow claimed as its own was turning into a nightmare of constant, unseen rebellion. Each act of sabotage carried outsized significance in the climate of total repression. Under occupation, even tiny gestures of defiance, a spray-painted Ukrainian trident on a wall, a leaflet slipped under a door, became profoundly meaningful. They showed that fear had not crushed the will to resist. After Russia's swift offensive seized Kherson and Zaporizhia, partisan militias sprang up almost immediately, derailing trains, blowing up bridges, and assassinating puppet officials. Russian forces responded with brutal crackdowns. By late 2022, open resistances in places like Mariupol had dwindled under the weight of terror. But the embers of rebellion never died out. They simply glowed, waiting for a gust of wind to roar back into flame. That wind came as the war ground on. By 2023, Ukraine's special services began coordinating more closely with underground fighters. Sabotage efforts became more sophisticated, targeting military depots, railroads, and communications hubs vital to the Russian war machine. The pattern was unmistakable. Wherever Putin's troops tried to entrench, the ground beneath them was starting to burn. And then the flames of partisan resistance leapt over Ukraine's borders entirely, into Russia itself. What had begun as local insurgencies on occupied soil spread like wildfire into the Russian heartland. Suddenly, sabotage was erupting across the vast expanse of Russia, from the European frontiers to the Far East. Putin's own backyard was no longer secure. A secret war was unfolding deep inside Russia, waged by shadowy figures who struck at night and vanished by dawn. Near-daily fires, explosions, and technical failures began afflicting Russia's railways, military facilities, and critical infrastructure. The Kremlin struggled to comprehend, let alone contain, this spreading insurgency. In the Kursk region, a series of mysterious incidents sent shockwaves through Russia's security apparatus. One night, a massive explosion rocked a rail yard. Ukrainian special forces, working with a Russian partisan network, had destroyed a key Iskander ballistic missile loader and a Harmonia air defense radar in a daring raid. The message was chilling. Even here on Russian soil, hundreds of kilometers from the front, the war could strike like lightning. In the following weeks, sabotage struck in waves, a relay cabinet blown up in the distant Vologda, arson attacks torching multiple communications towers in Bashkortostan, a rash of fires hitting electrical panels and railway signal boxes from the Moscow suburbs all the way to Irkutsk. Local officials were baffled or in denial. Many incidents were officially dismissed as unexplained technical failures, an attempt to hide the alarming truth from the public. But everyone knew that something was very, very wrong. Perhaps the boldest strike came in the heart of Russia's capital region. In the late 2025, saboteurs infiltrated the Moscow outskirts and blew up sections of the Ring pipeline, a set of fuel lines feeding Moscow's major refineries and airports. The blast knocked out all three fuel lines at once, halting supplies of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel to the capital. Putin's officials scrambled to send emergency repair teams across the region. The symbolism was stark, a pipeline vital to Moscow's economy torn apart from within. The war was no longer a distant news item on Donetsk or Zaporizhia. It was now a rumble beneath the feet of ordinary Russians in Moscow suburbs. These weren't random acts of vandalism. They were a coordinated campaign to erode the Russian state's ability to wage war and to undermine its aura of total control. Intelligence reports noted how sabotage incidents now appear in clusters, hitting logistics, communications, and security forces at the same time. It was as if an invisible hand were orchestrating a simultaneous assault on the pillars of Putin's war machine. Every derailed train or depot fire forces Moscow to divert soldiers to guard duty, stretching an already strained army even thinner. Russian commanders who once felt secure behind the front now must wonder what will explode next. But here's what should terrify Putin most. Many of these strikes inside Russia weren't the work of Ukrainian commandos alone. They had help from Russians within his own borders. A clandestine partisan movement was taking root among his own citizens. The vast Russian Federation, long held together by propaganda and fear, was now showing signs of fracture. That point was driven home dramatically in June 2023, where Putin's once loyal mercenaries, the Wagner Group, mutinied and marched towards Moscow. In both low-level sabotage and high-level rebellion, the pattern was the same. The facade of control was crumbling, and in the shadows of this secret war, Russian citizens themselves were emerging as the newest and perhaps most potent insurgents. The most profound sign of Putin's loosening grip is that Russians are now fighting Russians to end his rule. What began as isolated acts of anti-war arson by desperate individuals has evolved into organized resistance. New anti-Putin partisan groups have sprouted across Russia, openly claiming responsibility for sabotage and urging others to join them. They operate under names like Liberator, Stop the Wagons, and Black Spark, signaling their intent to stop the Kremlin's war machine by any means. These aren't foreign agents or Ukrainian infiltrators. They are Russia's own sons and daughters turning against the regime. One of the most prominent is the Freedom of Russia Legion. Formed by defectors and volunteers determined to overthrow Putin, this legion fights alongside Ukraine. but its members are ethnic Russians, aiming their guns back home. In May 2023, the Freedom of Russia Legion, together with the allied Russian Volunteer Corps, made headlines with an armed raid into Russia's Belgorod region. For the first time in this war, the Kremlin's forces had to confront an incursion on their own soil led by ethnic Russian fighters carrying a white-blue-white flag of rebellion. That raid was psychologically seismic. It shattered the Kremlin's narrative that Russians universally back the war. Here were Russians under arms literally cleansing their house of Putin's filth, as one Legion fighter put it. The partisans filmed themselves on Russians' territory declaring "For Russia, for freedom," a battle cry against their own dictator. Legion members say this is only the beginning. A Legion commander, known only as Caesar, vowed to intensify the fight both from outside and inside Russia. He spoke of a very big resistance movement present inside Russia, a guerrilla network burning war commissariats and destroying railways. According to Caesar, this underground war is growing by the day. More people see that they are on the right side and want to join them. Putin, who built his power on the mantra of stability, now faces the spectre of a domestic insurgency. Other groups bolster this uprising. In March 2023, Russia's Bryansk region awoke to astonishing news. An armed unit had crossed from Ukraine and briefly seized villages. Kiev stated it had nothing to do with it, and indeed, the Russian Volunteer Corps claimed the raid. Masked fighters recorded a video addressing ordinary Russians. "We are not at war with civilians. It's time you realize you're not slaves. Start a rebellion. Fight." Such words spoke on Russian soil by Russian dissidents were unprecedented. Meanwhile, a clandestine network called Black Spark had been striking critical targets in Russia's rear. This Russian partisan cell operates in concert with Ukrainian special forces. Together, they have conducted high-impact raids aimed at crippling Russia's ability to wage war. In one recent operation, Black Spark units coordinated with Ukraine's elite SSO to destroy a modern Book M3 air defense system and a Nebo-U radar in Rostov Oblast. The SSO described these missions as inflicting 1,000 cuts on the enemy. The strategy is clear: bleed Putin's forces through constant scattered pain until the once mighty war machine collapses from exhaustion. What's remarkable is that those wielding the knife are Russians themselves, citizens disgusted with Putin's war, turning their sabotage skills against their homeland's military. By leveraging such insiders, Ukraine exploits a deadly advantage: the rot within Russia's system. Consider Artesh, a clandestine movement of Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars united in resistance. Founded in Crimea in 2022, Artesh, which fittingly means fire in Turkish, soon spread its operations on occupied Kherson, then Donetsk and Zaporizhia, and now deep into Russia itself. It boasts an extensive network, some 7,000 members by one count, blending in under the very noses of Russian authorities. Artesh agents have repeatedly struck at Russia's logistics. They derail trains, blow up rail junctions, and even claim credit for assassinating pro-war figures. In November 2025, Artesh partisans penetrated a major rail hub in Rostov-on-Don, just 40 miles from Ukraine's border, and set a military supply train's locomotive ablaze. Video on their Telegram channel showed the engine engulfed in flames, burning bright against the night. Artesh wrote that the operation disrupted train schedules carrying ammunition and reserves to the front. From derailed trains in Siberia to unexplained explosions in military research institutes near Moscow, the pattern is unmistakable. Russians inside the country are actively subverting Putin's war. Even ordinary citizens not formally in any group have been moved to action or manipulation. In 2023 and 2024, a bizarre trend saw dozens of arson attacks on enlistment offices, banks, and police cars across Russia, often carried out by pensioners and teenagers who were cynically duped by online recruiters. Some were promised money to torch government property, others were tricked into thinking they were doing something else entirely. Every segment of Russian society, from disillusioned veterans to grandmothers with a grudge, from nationalist mercenaries to liberal students, is contributing, wittingly or not, to this growing tapestry of defiance. The cumulative effect is stunning. Artesh alone has been linked to at least 32 acts of sabotage inside Russia in 2025, and Artesh is just one player. The Freedom of Russia Legion promises more raids to wash away the stain of Putin's regime. Black Spark relentlessly picks off high-value targets behind the lines, and countless unknown Russians in dozens of cities carry out quiet acts of resistance. A rail switch tampered with here, a military recruitment office set on fire there. That never even makes the news. Vladimir Putin is facing something he never expected and cannot easily crush: a rebellion from within, diffused across the country with no single leader or center. This is an insurgency of many faces, united only by a shared conviction that Putin's war is a national catastrophe. The longer the war drags on, the stronger this underground movement grows. But these attacks are merely symptoms of something far deeper. They signal a more existential crisis for the Kremlin, symptoms of systemic decay spreading through the very foundations of the regime. Autocracies often appear solid until, quite suddenly, they're not. Economically and socially, the strain of war is eroding the glue that held Russia together. Over 650,000 Russians have fled the country since the invasion began, the largest wave of emigration in Russia's modern history. Those aren't draft dodgers alone. They include the young, educated, and creative citizens who felt they had no future under a repressive wartime regime. The brain drain and the loss of talent will haunt Russia for years. Those who remain are often silenced or isolated by pervasive propaganda. But as casualties mount, especially among poor ethnic minority regions, cracks of anger have surfaced. Mothers in Dagestan boldly protested the conscription of their sons in 2022. Whispers of discontent have spread from soldiers' families across the country. The Kremlin has tried to plaster over these cracks with lies and more fear, passing draconian laws, jailing anyone who speaks too plainly about defeat. Yet reality is catching up. The greater threat now festers at home, a breakdown of the social contract that underpinned Putin's rule. For years, Russians tolerated or even supported Putin as long as he delivered order, pride, and economic stability. The war in Ukraine, sold on TV as a short, triumphant special operation, has instead dragged Russia into a quagmire of attrition. The state throws untrained conscripts into the meat grinder while daily life for ordinary people becomes more impoverished and restricted. Mistrust and cynicism are spreading, and as if to embody the internal collapse of unity, Putin's one-time ally, Yevgeny Prigozhin, led the Wagner mercenaries in a brazen armed mutiny, seizing the military headquarters and marching on Moscow in June 2023. For 36 hours, the world saw the unbelievable. Putin's vaunted security forces standing aside as a private army drove to within a few hundred kilometers of the Kremlin. Though the mutiny was aborted, the damage was done. The illusion of Putin's absolute control was shattered. If even his loyal warlord could rebel, who else in the inner circle might waver? Psychologically, Russia is beginning to feel war at home. Even disruptions that have no direct military impact can have a profound psychological effect. A fire at a distant oil depot or a train derailed by saboteurs might seem minor in the grand scheme, but such events dominate headlines and fuel public anxiety at minimal cost to those who cause them. A steady drumbeat of unexplained disasters makes Russians wonder what's really going on. It creates the impression that the country's security is penetrable, that the state is not in full control. The atmosphere of uncertainty and vulnerability is corrosive. It chips away at the central narrative of Putin's regime, the promise that he is the strongman who keeps Russia safe and strong. In the villages near the Ukrainian border, shelling and raids have become a terrifying new normal. Families there feel abandoned and angry that Moscow can't protect them. In the great cities, each new incident, a drone attack on a skyscraper, a blast on a railway, undercuts the myth that the war is far away. Russians are beginning to sense that the war is closer than they were told. It's on their streets, perhaps in their neighbor's garage, plotting the next firebombing. The Kremlin's reflex is to double down on denial. State media seldom acknowledges partisan attacks. Officials attribute explosions to accidents or blame lone Ukrainian terrorists to avoid admitting any local opposition. But denial is a double-edged sword. By refusing to confront the reality of internal dissent, Putin's regime only lets the cancer spread unseen. History teaches us that when rulers cling to denial, they lose the chance to right the ship. The late Soviet leadership similarly avoided acknowledging how deeply the Afghan war and economic malaise had alienated their populace, until the USSR unraveled almost overnight. In Tsarist Russia during World War I, the Tsar's inner circle dismissed bread riots immunities until it was too late, and 300 years of Romanov rule collapsed in days. Today, Putin insists everything is under control, even as cracks split the walls around him. In this 25th year of Putin's regime, the Kremlin still outwardly projects confidence, grand parades on Red Square, fiery speeches denouncing external enemies, arrests of traitors to scare the rest. But beneath that facade, a secret war is tearing the country apart. It's a war of saboteurs and partisans, of whispers and flames in the dark, of citizens who have decided they will no longer be cogs in Putin's war machine. It's the kind of war any autocrat fears most, the enemy within, impossible to fully identify or eliminate. With each passing month, Putin is losing control, not in one cataclysmic event, but in a slow, relentless bleed. A rail junction disabled here, an ammo depot torched there, a protest sign-off in a far village, a mutiny brewing in the ranks. These are individual threads slowly unweaving the tapestry of the regime. In the end, the consequences of ruling through fear and denial are coming due. Fear can jail or silence people, it cannot truly command their loyalty. Denial can paper over problems, it cannot make them disappear. By silencing peaceful critics, Putin ensured that the anger in his society would find other outlets, and it has, in Molotov cocktails and rogue drones. By denying the very possibility of Russian descent, he is blind into the mutiny he is brewing under his feet. There is a powerful irony at play. Putin launched a real war to crush an independent Ukraine, insisting that the greatest threat to Russia came from outside. Instead, he has ignited the fuse on his own undoing from within. The systemic decay, the disillusionment, the collapse of unity, the cultural erosion was accelerated by his choices. And now the bill has come due. The Russian state, like so many autocracies before, risks falling victim to what it thought was its strengths, the ruthless suppression of its people. For a while, fear can hold walls upright, but when enough bricks have crumbled, even the thickest walls collapse under their own weight. No one can say exactly when or how this will end. Perhaps Putin will manage to smother the fires of resistance a while longer. Perhaps the secret war will keep simmering in the shadows. But one day, perhaps sooner than expected, a spark might catch that cannot be put out. A nation fueled by fear can break suddenly, like a dam holding back an immense pressure which finally bursts from within. In that chilling moment, the system fails all at once, and those who for so long pretended everything was fine are left stunned at how fast the mighty fall. History is watching. In Russia today, the slow unraveling continues, thread by thread. A train sabotage, a slogan of freedom whispered, a lie exposed. Putin's empire of fear is bleeding from 1,000 cuts. And if there's one lesson to be drawn, it's that the soul of a nation cannot be indefinitely silenced. The truth finds a way, whether in words or in flames. The secret war, once in the shadows, is now ripping Russia apart for all to see. So, what do you think? Is Putin's grip finally slipping beyond repair? Or will the Kremlin find a way to crush the rebellion before it spreads even further? Let us know in the comments and subscribe to Fall of Nations for more on the forces reshaping our world.